The day my own son called me a burden was the day something inside me broke. At 79, I thought I had earned peace. I had raised him through nights of hunger, built his future with calloused hands, and gave him everything, only to hear those cruel words in my own home. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam any doors. I simply left. And now, I sign his paycheck that I was born in 1946, a year after the war ended. Detroit was alive back then, engines roaring, factories humming, hope rising like smoke from every chimney. My father worked in the plants, my mother stitched uniforms. They didn't have much, but they gave me grit. Real grit. The kind that teaches you to take pride in grease under your fingernails and warmth from an honest day's work. I started as a machinist when I was just 20. The factory floor was a loud, brutal place, metal grinding, steam hissing, supervisors shouting over the clang of the world being built. But I loved it. I loved the smell of iron and oil. I loved knowing that something I touched helped build America. For 45 years, I never missed a day. Rain, snow, even once with a cracked rib, I showed up. Then I met Eleanor. God, she was sunshine in a factory town. Blonde curls, smile like spring. She worked at the diner near the plant, served me coffee every morning. I remember the first time I asked her out, my hands were shaking so bad she thought I'd been electrocuted. We married in 1970. Two-bedroom apartment, peeling wallpaper, second-hand furniture, but our love made it feel like a palace. 3 years later, Michael was born. I still remember holding him, tiny, red-faced, crying like he'd already seen what the world could do to a man. I swore I'd shield him from all of it. I wanted him to have choices. Options. A life beyond time cards and torn ligaments. We bought a house in Hazel Park after saving for 5 long years. $42,000 with a leaky roof and a dying furnace. I worked double shifts and fixed the roof myself, shivering on winter nights with a flashlight in my mouth and Eleanor holding the ladder. We painted walls with borrowed brushes. We made it a home. Michael was a good boy. Smart. Curious. He'd sit at the table with my broken radio parts, asking how things worked. He once said, "Dad, when I grow up, I'm going to wear a suit and work in a tall glass building." I smiled and said, "Then I'll shine your shoes every morning, son." We never had much. No fancy vacations, no big screen TVs. But we had Friday night meatloaf, backyard barbecues, old jazz records, and laughter. I worked Saturdays at the shop, and Eleanor worked part-time as a librarian just to put Michael through college. We paid every tuition bill ourselves, no loans, no debt. We cut corners, bought used clothes, and skipped anniversaries, but we did it. For him. The day he graduated with a degree in business administration, I wore my only suit. It was too tight, smelled like mothballs, and had a tear behind the shoulder, but I wore it like armor. I sat in that stadium, heart bursting with pride. When they called his name, I cried. I didn't care who saw. Later that evening, we threw him a party in our backyard. I grilled, Eleanor made her lemon cake, and Michael said, "One day, I'll make sure you never have to work another day in your life, Dad." He hugged me hard. I believed him. I retired at 67. We'd saved enough, just enough. No yachts or golf clubs, but enough to live. I wanted to travel with Eleanor, maybe see the Grand Canyon like she always dreamed. We were finally free. All those years of sacrifice, and we were ready to breathe. But then she got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Fast. Brutal. 6 months from diagnosis to the day I held her hand in that hospice bed. She died looking into my eyes, whispering, "Take care of him, John. He'll need you more than ever." That was the last promise I made her. After the funeral, Michael offered to take me in. "You shouldn't be alone, Dad," he said. His wife nodded. They had a big house in Rochester Hills. It made sense. I sold ours, our little sanctuary of 50 years, and moved in with my son. I packed our photo albums, Eleanor's favorite books, my old tools, and that suit from his graduation day. I thought it would be a new beginning. But even then, something in his voice felt rehearsed. Empty. I brushed it off. Grief does strange things to people. I told myself we'd heal together. That a father and son, scarred by loss, could rebuild something even stronger. I had no idea what was waiting for me. At first, things were quiet. Michael had a room ready for me, a small one on the main floor, right near the laundry room. "Easier for you, Dad," he said, gesturing at the stairs. I nodded. It made sense. His wife, Caroline, helped unpack a few boxes and asked if I needed anything. I told her no, just a shelf for Eleanor's books and a plug for my old radio. She smiled politely. But it didn't reach her eyes. I spent my mornings tending their garden. The backyard was overgrown, weeds taller than the kids. I didn't mind. There was something peaceful about dirt under the nails and the sun on my neck. It reminded me of simpler times. I trimmed hedges, planted tomatoes, even built a birdhouse with their youngest, Lily. She called me Grampy Wren because we watched the birds together every morning. In the beginning, I tried to stay out of their way. I woke up early, made my own breakfast, kept the bathroom clean. I offered to pay rent, but Michael waved it off. "Dad, you've done enough." I appreciated that. Or I thought I did. But soon, I started noticing things. Dinner was always eaten before I came to the table. "Oh, we thought you already ate," Caroline would say, scraping her plate. I'd microwave leftovers alone while laughter echoed from the living room. Once, I accidentally walked into their bedroom looking for laundry. I heard Caroline whisper, "He's always around." "I need space, Michael." I froze. She never knew I was there. Michael stopped asking me about my day. He used to ask for advice, on work, on life. Now, his questions were all transactional. "Did you take the trash out? Can you pick up the kids from school? Did you use the dishwasher again? It's not energy efficient." I didn't mind helping. I wanted to help. But there was a difference between being needed and being tolerated. The real shift came the night I offered to take them out for dinner. I had just received my small pension check. I suggested a nice Italian place down the road. "My treat," I said. Caroline looked at Michael, then laughed. "Dad, we don't need your money. You should save it for, things." Things? I went to my room early that night. Eleanor's books stared back at me like witnesses. I opened her favorite, To Kill a Mockingbird, and found her note on the inside cover, "People matter more than pride. Don't ever forget that." But pride was all I had left. I kept helping around the house. Cleaned the garage. Fixed a broken cabinet. Painted the fence. But no one noticed. Or if they did, they didn't say anything. Gratitude disappeared, replaced by expectation. I wasn't helping anymore. I was just maintaining. Then came the day that truly stung. Caroline had a friend over. I was coming in from the garden, covered in dirt. I heard them talking through the screen door. "He's still living here?" her friend asked. Caroline sighed. "Yeah. Michael says it's temporary, but you know how it is. He's old. But he won't die. And he's costing us more than we thought." I didn't open the door. I walked back out into the yard and sat beside the wilted tomatoes. I stayed there until nightfall, just listening to the crickets and trying not to cry. When Michael came out later, I pretended I was asleep. A few days after, I noticed my name wasn't listed on the emergency contact forms for the kids anymore. They changed the school pickups. They started locking the wine cabinet. They hid small things, like the good towels or new groceries. I told myself I was imagining it. That it was grief. Adjustment. Anything but resentment. But deep down, I knew. My son was slipping away from me. Not with anger. Not with shouting. But with silence. Cold, calculated distance. I still remember sitting at the edge of the bed one evening, Eleanor's picture in my hand, whispering, "I don't think he needs me anymore." But that wasn't true. He did need me, just not as a father. Not as a man with wisdom or love. He needed me quiet, invisible, and compliant. A fixture. A shadow. A burden without voice. And I was starting to believe that maybe I was. August 14th. That date has been etched into my memory for 79 years. It was the day I was born, in a cramped hospital room in downtown Detroit. My mother used to say I came into the world with my fists clenched, ready to fight for life. Every year since, no matter how hard things got, someone, Eleanor, Michael, even the guys at the shop, always remembered. But not this time. I woke up that morning to silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the hollow, echoing kind that fills your chest like a stone. I waited for the usual knock on my door, a "Happy birthday, Dad," or even a dry nod from Caroline. Nothing. I got dressed slowly, putting on my best shirt, the pale blue one Eleanor bought me before she passed. It still smelled faintly like lavender and home. I combed my thinning hair, even polished my shoes. I wanted to look presentable, just in case. Downstairs, the kitchen was bustling. Caroline was packing lunches. Michael was talking on his Bluetooth headset, pacing back and forth like a CEO in a hurry. The kids were arguing over cereal. I stood there for a moment. Just watching. Then I cleared my throat. "Morning." No one looked up. "Morning," I said again, louder this time. Michael glanced at me. "Oh, hey, Dad. Can you take the bins out today? It's trash pickup." That was it. No card. No cake. Not even a passing acknowledgement. I stared at him, waiting for a smile, a wink, anything that said he was pretending. That he had something planned. But he was already walking away. So I took the bins out. That afternoon, I walked to the corner store and bought a single chocolate cupcake. It had white sprinkles and cost $2.25. I told the clerk it was for my granddaughter. He smiled and said, "She's lucky." I nodded. Back home, I waited until the house was empty. Then I lit a candle I found in the junk drawer, set it in the cupcake, and sat at the kitchen table. Just me, Eleanor's picture beside me, and a flame that flickered like my dignity. I didn't sing. I just whispered, "Happy birthday, old man." Then I blew it out and threw the rest away. I didn't even eat it. That night, after dinner, Michael came into my room. I was fixing a loose button on one of his son's school uniforms, something I offered to do weeks ago. He didn't look at me. Just stood in the doorway. "Dad, we need to talk," he said. I nodded, already knowing where it was going. "Caroline and we've been thinking. It's been a few years now, and we're wondering if it might be time to consider, other arrangements. Assisted living. Or something like that." I looked up at him. "Is this about money?" He hesitated. "It's not just that. It's the space. The kids are growing. Caroline's overwhelmed. You're getting older, Dad." I stared at him for a long time. "I gave you this life," I said softly. "I know," he replied. "But things change." Those words landed like a hammer. Things change. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't mention the decades I spent breaking my back so he could wear suits and eat at steakhouses. I didn't remind him of the late nights fixing broken pipes, or the years Eleanor and I skipped dinners so he could have shoes that fit. Instead, I just nodded. "All right," I said. "I understand." He looked surprised. Maybe he expected resistance. But I didn't have it in me. That night, while they slept, I packed a single duffel bag. A few clothes. My tools. Eleanor's photo. My journal. Nothing else. I left a note on the bed, "Don't worry. I won't be a burden any longer." Then I walked out the front door. It was just past midnight. The streets were empty. The moon was high and cold. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I couldn't stay. I ended up at a park bench downtown, the same one Eleanor and I used to sit on when we were young and poor and happy. I slept there that night, curled up beneath a coat that didn't quite cover my knees. It wasn't the cold that kept me awake. It was the ache. The ache of being discarded by the very person you spent your whole life holding up. I watched the sunrise through watery eyes, the sky turning shades of orange and grief. And I said something out loud that I hadn't said in a long time. "I miss you, Ellie." Because in that moment, I did. More than ever. Because she never forgot. Not once. I spent 2 more nights on that bench. The second night, it rained. Not a soft drizzle, but a hard, punishing storm that soaked me to the bone. My coat clung to my skin, and my bones ached like they hadn't in years. I curled up beneath the park's rusted pavilion, water dripping from the rafters onto Eleanor's photo, tucked in my chest pocket. I didn't sleep. I just sat there and listened to the thunder, wondering if this shivering shell of a man, was all I had left to become. On the third morning, a voice called my name. "John." I turned slowly, not expecting to hear anything familiar. And there he was, Charlie Matthews. We'd worked together back in the 80s at the machine shop, before he moved south to run his uncle's plumbing business. Time hadn't been kind to either of us, but I knew that face. "God Almighty," he said, rushing over. "What the hell are you doing out here?" I couldn't speak at first. I just looked at him, and he must have seen everything written on my face: grief, shame, the betrayal I hadn't yet said out loud. He didn't ask questions. "Come on," he said. "You're coming with me." Charlie lived just outside the city in a little one-story house with peeling paint and a busted porch swing. He opened the door, and the smell of wood polish and old carpet hit me like a warm blanket. "You can take the basement," he said. "Ain't fancy, but it's dry." He wasn't lying. The basement had a single bulb, 1 small window, and a cement floor cracked in 2 places. A twin mattress rested on milk crates, and there were old paint cans stacked in the corner like forgotten soldiers. But it was mine. And it was safe. I thanked him. Again and again. That night, I slept like I hadn't in years. The next morning, Charlie brought down a cup of black coffee and a bologna sandwich. "You just take your time," he said. "No rush. I ain't gonna treat you like no charity case, but I ain't lettin' you go back to the street either." He had no idea what that meant to me. In the weeks that followed, I kept quiet. I didn't burden Charlie with my story. But he saw it in my eyes. In the way I held Eleanor's photo, in the way I winced every time someone said, "son." I helped out where I could, cleaned the gutters, fixed a broken chair, even unclogged his kitchen sink. Still, I spent most of my time alone down there. Just me, that little window, and Eleanor. One afternoon, I opened my old journal. The last entry was from the week before she died. "Michael's coming over tonight. I hope they talk. John keeps so much inside." I stared at that sentence for a long time. So I began to write. Not just about what had happened, but about everything. Eleanor. Michael. The sacrifices. The silence. The birthday. The walk into the dark. And then, one night, I started to pray. I hadn't prayed in years. Not since Eleanor passed. But down in that cold basement, where the only sound was the hum of a water heater and the distant croak of frogs outside, I knelt beside that creaky bed and whispered. God. I don't want revenge. I don't even want an apology. I just want to matter again. Not as a guest. Not as a burden. As a man. I cried then. Deep, heaving sobs I hadn't let myself feel since the funeral. And when the tears dried, I felt lighter. Not better. But lighter. Days turned into weeks. One Sunday, Charlie invited me to his church. I hadn't stepped inside one since Eleanor's funeral. But I went. The building was small, just a converted old post office, but it had warmth. The pastor was young, but his words carried weight. He spoke about renewal, about how the worst endings sometimes hide the best beginnings. After the service, an older man approached me, Harold Jenkins. We got to talking, and he mentioned he owned a small machine shop that was barely staying afloat. Can't find good hands anymore, he said. These young guys, they don't know steel like we did. I told him I used to work the lathes. That I still had the calluses to prove it. His eyes lit up. You ever think about getting back in? I almost laughed. At 79? He didn't flinch. Steel doesn't care how old your hands are. Just whether they're steady. That night, back in the basement, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, at the spiderwebs clinging to old pipes, and I whispered to Eleanor's photo. What if I'm not done yet? It wasn't about pride. It wasn't about showing anyone anything. It was about purpose. A quiet, steady purpose. And for the first time in years, I felt it flicker inside me, just like that birthday candle I'd blown out alone. But this time, I wasn't going to let it go out. Have your children ever forgotten your birthday? Tell me below. Sometimes silence hurts more than words. The next morning, I called Harold. I didn't even let the nerves catch up to me, I just did it. Told him I'd come down to the shop, take a look, see if I could be of any help. He was surprised. You sure, John? I mean, we can't pay much. I told him I wasn't chasing paychecks. I was chasing purpose. The machine shop was a tired old building tucked behind a row of pawn shops and closed-down diners. The sign above the door read, Jenkins Fabrication, the letters so faded they looked like ghosts. Inside, it smelled like rust, oil, and old effort, things I remembered well. 2 machines were still running, barely. A lathe that wobbled like a drunk man and a press that shrieked like it was dying. There was one young guy sweeping the floor, eyes glued to his phone, chewing gum like it owed him money. This is all I got left, Harold said, his voice heavy. My boys didn't want it. Said it was a dead industry. I walked around, ran my hand over the steel bench. My fingers remembered. My bones remembered. I closed my eyes and heard the rhythm of my old life in the grind of gears, the hum of honest labor. I think, I said slowly, it's not dead yet. That afternoon, I crawled under the main lathe and worked for 5 hours straight. Replaced a belt, realigned the gear housing, cleaned out decades of grime. By nightfall, it was humming smoother than it had in years. The young guy, Tyler, stood in the corner, mouth open. You really fixed that? I just smiled. That machine and I go back longer than you've been alive. The next day, I came back with my old tool bag. Wrenches, gauges, micrometers. Tools I hadn't touched since Eleanor passed. They still fit in my hands like old friends. Harold offered me a part-time gig, and I took it. Not because I needed the money, but because I needed to feel useful again. Word started spreading, quiet as dust. Some of my old clients, the ones who hadn't gone out of business or to China, heard I was back in a shop. One guy dropped in with a busted gearbox. Another came with a custom bracket job nobody else wanted to touch. "Didn't think you were still alive, John," one of them joked. "Sometimes neither do I," I replied. We charged fair prices. Did good work. Gave honest timelines. And slowly, the trickle became a steady flow. Within 2 months, Harold asked me if I'd consider becoming a partner. "I can't run this forever, John. But with you in here, we might just have a future." I was stunned. Me. A partner. At 79. I told him I didn't have much, just about $12,000 saved after everything was said and done. He shook my hand anyway. "That's more than I started with." We signed papers at a corner bank, 2 old men in worn coats, grinning like kids with a lemonade stand. We repainted the walls. Replaced the roof with a loan. Tyler started showing up early. Said he wanted to learn the right way. I taught him everything I could. How to listen to a machine. How to smell burning aluminum. How to treat every job like it might be the one someone else said couldn't be done. The shop began to breathe again. And so did I. I moved out of Charlie's basement and into a small room above the shop. It wasn't much, just a bed, a desk, and a tiny bathroom, but it was mine. I hung Eleanor's picture over the workbench. She looked down at me like she always had, loving, steady, proud. Every morning, I made coffee in an old tin percolator and stood by the front window, watching the sunrise over the cracked parking lot. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't retirement on a beach. But it was peace. One morning, while cleaning out a dusty filing cabinet, I found an old company ledger from the 90s. Tucked inside was a photo, me and Harold, 30 years younger, arms around each other, covered in grease. I laughed so hard I cried. Because somehow, in the mess of being discarded, forgotten, and left behind, I had found my way back to who I was. Not as a father. Not as a guest. But as a man. And I had no idea then that the past I thought I'd buried was about to walk through that shop door again, wearing a suit, holding a resume, and looking for a job. It was a Monday morning when I heard the front bell ring. I was at the back of the shop, hands deep in a gearbox, sweat rolling down my temple. Tyler was off loading parts, and Harold was at a doctor's appointment. We weren't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on a rag and headed toward the front. And there he was. Michael. My son. He was standing just inside the doorway, suit wrinkled, tie loosened, hair a mess, like he'd slept in his car. His eyes were puffy. Pale. But it wasn't age that had dulled them. It was something else. Something heavier. He didn't see me at first. He was looking around the shop, probably trying to make sense of where he'd ended up. The place didn't look like much from the outside, just another rusty machine shop in a forgotten neighborhood. But inside, it pulsed with life. With pride. When I stepped into the light, he glanced at me. No flicker of recognition. Just a quick nod. "Hey. Is the owner in?" I paused. "Depends," I said, lowering my voice. "What's this about?" He cleared his throat, pulled out a folded resume from his jacket pocket. "I was told this place might be hiring. I just got laid off. I'm looking for anything. Doesn't matter what." I stared at him. My son. The same son who had asked me to leave his house like I was some unwanted bill he couldn't pay. Now standing here, hat in hand, asking for work. He still didn't recognize me. My beard had grown out. My hair was longer. I was dressed in thick overalls, face smudged with grease. To him, I was just another old man in a shop full of noise. Something inside me wavered. I could have told him then. Could have laid it all bare. But I didn't. I took the resume slowly, looked it over like a stranger would. Michael Thompson, I read aloud. Business degree. Worked in logistics and procurement. He straightened his back like he was in an interview. I can start immediately. I just need a shot. I nodded slowly, pretending to think. We don't have any desk jobs right now. But we do need someone to clean the floors, handle deliveries, move supplies. It's dirty work. He hesitated. For a second, I saw the pride in his face twitch, like a muscle unused to bending. I'll take it, he said quietly. And just like that, my son was working for me. He showed up the next morning at 7 a.m., wearing sneakers and a nice polo. Tyler handed him a mop and pointed to the back room. Start there. Watch your step. I watched from the office window as he worked. He fumbled. Sweated. Struggled with the weight of things. The man who once lectured me on efficiency, now dragging trash bins behind a broken dolly. At first, he was bitter. He rolled his eyes. Took long bathroom breaks. Complained under his breath. But something happened in the weeks that followed. He started showing up earlier. He started asking questions, about the machines, the parts, the process. Tyler even said, the new guy's not half bad. Kind of a slow learner, but he's trying. Michael never asked me my name. He called me, sir, or just nodded. Maybe he was too distracted to look closely. Maybe part of him didn't want to look. One day, I caught him staring at the picture of Eleanor on my desk. Your wife? He asked. I nodded. She's beautiful. She was, I said. Lost her a few years back. He didn't say anything. Just looked away. There were moments, small ones, when I saw pieces of the boy I raised. The way he held the door open for a customer. The way he stayed late one Friday to help Tyler clean the break room. The way he picked up a photo of Harold's grandkids and smiled, softly. Each time, I wanted to say it. To tell him. But I didn't. Instead, I offered him lunch one afternoon, a simple sandwich I'd packed. He hesitated, then accepted. We sat on milk crates behind the shop, chewing in silence. I used to work in offices, he said suddenly. Thought I had it all figured out. I looked at him. What happened? He shrugged. Tried to live bigger than I could. Forgot what mattered. Pushed the wrong people away. He didn't look at me when he said it. But I felt every word hit like a nail to the chest. I think about my dad a lot lately, he added. Oh? I said, barely breathing. Yeah. I wasn't a good son. I didn't see him for what he was. Now it's too late. My hands trembled in my lap. I wanted to say, I'm right here, Michael. I never left you. Even when you left me. But all I said was, maybe it's not too late. He nodded, wiped his hands, and went back to work. And I sat there, behind the shop, staring at the sun breaking through a cracked window pane, wondering how long I could keep hiding behind grease and silence. There's something about routine that teaches you more than lectures ever could. Michael had been working at the shop for nearly 2 months by then. He came in before sunrise now, rolled up his sleeves without being asked, and took pride in small victories, organizing the supply shelves, getting oil stains out of the concrete, balancing inventory sheets by hand. It wasn't the life he had imagined, and it wasn't the version of him I had known. But somehow, through the dust and labor, my son was beginning to become a man again. And he still didn't know who I was. I'd see him staring sometimes, like something about me was familiar but he couldn't quite place it. Maybe it was the way I moved, or the way I tightened bolts with the back of my wrist, something I always did to protect my palms. Maybe it was my voice when I laughed. Or maybe he didn't want to remember. But I remembered everything. I remembered the day I taught him how to ride a bike, my hand on his back, whispering, "Keep pedaling, son. I've got you." I remembered how he clung to my shirt the first day of kindergarten. How he used to wait by the window for me to come home from the factory, waving like I was a hero. And now here he was, mopping the same floors I walked, breathing the same air I had for decades, yet unable to see the man he once called Dad. At first, I thought about telling him every day. But then I began to understand something. He wasn't ready. This wasn't a punishment. I wasn't hiding out of spite. I wanted him to earn something more important than forgiveness. I wanted him to rediscover humility. One afternoon, the lathe jammed in the middle of a rushed job. Tyler panicked. Harold was out again. I was in the middle of troubleshooting when Michael stepped forward. "Want me to help?" I hesitated. "All right," I said. "Hand me that torque wrench and keep your eyes on what I'm doing." For the next 2 hours, I taught him. Not like a father teaching a son, but like a master passing something on to a curious apprentice. He listened. Asked questions. Took notes on a scrap of cardboard. His hands shook the first time he adjusted the feed rate, but he got it right. And when the machine came back to life, he grinned like a boy who'd built a rocket. "You're good at this," I told him. He looked down. "I wish someone had taught me this stuff sooner." I just nodded. Sometimes, the lesson doesn't come until we're ready to learn. The next week, I gave him more responsibilities. Helped him set up a workstation. Asked his opinion on a job spec, even though I already knew the answer. He was hesitant at first, like he didn't trust himself. But I could see the fire building. The pride. The need to become useful, not just employable. He still didn't know I was his father, but he was learning from me all the same. One night, after everyone had gone home, I found him sitting alone at the back of the shop, staring at a folded piece of paper. He didn't see me come in. It was the letter I'd left behind on his bed years ago. "Don't worry. I won't be a burden any longer." He must have carried it with him all this time. I watched as he read it again, silently mouthing the words. "I miss you, Dad," he whispered to no one. "I don't know where you are, but I'd give anything to go back." I stepped back into the shadows, heart aching. Later that night, I sat at my workbench, Eleanor's photo watching me from the shelf above. "Ellie," I whispered, "he's starting to see. Bit by bit, he's peeling away the man he pretended to be." She didn't answer, but her eyes, frozen in time, told me everything I needed to hear. I thought about how far we'd come. From the night he called me a burden to now, working side by side with the man he'd thrown away. And I realized something painful but beautiful. Growth doesn't always come through apology. Sometimes it comes through sweat. Through silence. Through slow, earned redemption. Michael was changing. Not for me. Not because I demanded it. But because life had stripped him of every illusion he'd built, and in that stripping, he was finally becoming real again. He didn't need me to forgive him yet. He needed to forgive himself. And I would wait for that moment, not with anger, not with judgment, but with the quiet strength only a father can carry. If you were in my place, would you forgive them? Or would you reveal the truth? It happened on a Thursday morning. We had a big client coming in, Samuel's Manufacturing, an outfit that needed a dozen custom gearboxes fabricated within a ridiculous deadline. Harold had worked with them years ago, and they still remembered the old shop's reputation for precision. This job could mean more than just money, it could mean expansion, growth, new machines, maybe even more hires. It could secure our future. Michael had worked tirelessly prepping the shop for the visit. Cleaned every corner. Polished every tool. Made sure the invoices were printed and organized in a binder. Watching him reminded me of the boy he used to be, eager, driven, full of silent hope. He still didn't know who I was. But I knew who he was again. The client arrived just before noon. 3 men in suits, carrying laptops and thick folders. We gave them the tour. I let Michael take the lead. He stumbled once or twice, but his voice held steady. He answered technical questions. Quoted turnaround times accurately. Even told a joke that made one of them laugh, a genuine, hearty laugh. When the presentation ended, we all shook hands. And then it happened. One of the clients, Mr. Reynolds, looked at me and smiled. "John Thompson," he said, gripping my hand. "You still running this place like you did in '92? Michael froze. His head turned slowly toward me, confusion flooding his face. "Wait, what did you just say?" Reynolds chuckled. "I've known this guy for decades. Best damn machinist in Michigan. We did a ton of work with him when I was still at Allied. You're lucky to be working under him." Michael looked at me, blinking as if his eyes were betraying him. "John Thompson," he whispered. I said nothing. He stepped closer, staring at me now like he was seeing a ghost. "No. No, that can't be. That's not possible. You're..." His voice cracked. "Dad?" The room fell silent. Even the machines seemed to hold their breath. I met his eyes. "Yes." He staggered backward, hand to his mouth. Mr. Reynolds, sensing the shift, muttered something polite and ushered his team out quickly, promising to follow up by email. The door closed behind them with a soft thud. Michael turned to me, his face pale, eyes wide with something beyond shock, shame. "All this time," he said. "All this time it was you?" I nodded. "Why?" His voice was trembling. "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked at him long and hard. "Because you weren't ready to hear it." He dropped into a chair, head in his hands. "I thought you were dead. I thought you hated me. I looked for you, I tried." "No," I said softly. "You didn't. You waited for it to be convenient. You waited until your life crumbled. And then you missed me, not because you valued me, but because you needed something." He flinched. "But," I added, my voice steadier now, "you came here. You worked. You learned. You changed. And that means more than any apology you could have offered." Tears welled in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Dad. God, I'm so sorry." I walked over and sat beside him, the smell of oil and metal hanging thick in the air. "I never wanted revenge, Michael," I said. "I just wanted peace. I wanted to find the man I was before the world told me I was disposable." He was crying now, shoulders shaking. "I was scared," he said. "When Mom died, I didn't know how to fill your shoes. And then I resented you for staying strong when I couldn't. I blamed you for my own weakness. I know." He looked up at me. "Why didn't you tell me at the door? That first day. You saw me walk in. Because you needed to see what it felt like to start over. To work without entitlement. To fail and still show up the next day. You needed to meet me again, not as your father, but as a man you could respect." He nodded slowly. "I do. I do respect you. More than I ever have." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "I forgive you, son. But you need to forgive yourself too." He broke down then, completely. Years of guilt pouring out in a rush of sobs and gasps. And I sat with him, not as a boss, not even as a teacher. Just as a father who never stopped loving the boy who lost his way. Eventually, he wiped his face and said, "Will you come back home? Stay with us again? Let me make things right?" I smiled. I already have a home. It's here. Above the shop. It's quiet. Simple. It's mine. He looked disappointed, but he nodded. I understand. I stood and said, we can build something new. Together. Not as repayment. Just as men. As family. He stood too. And when he hugged me, it wasn't tight or desperate, it was honest. Like the hug of a man who'd finally found the ground beneath his feet. That evening, as the sun set behind the smokestacks and the sky turned a soft gold, Michael stayed late and helped me close up the shop. He swept the floor like he meant it. Double-checked the locks. Cleaned the tools with care. It wasn't a son returning to his father. It was a man returning to his roots. It started with letters. Michael began writing them a week after the reveal. Not emails, not texts, handwritten letters, like the kind I used to send Eleanor when we were young and poor and in love. He left them in my workshop mailbox. Folded neatly. Ink slightly smudged, as if he wrote them with trembling hands. Dad, I read your journal. I know you never meant for me to see it, but I did. Every line broke something inside me. I remember when you fixed my bike and I ran inside and told Mom you were a magician. You still are. I don't know how to undo what I did. But I want to try. Each one more raw than the last. Each one a slow unraveling of a man who had buried his guilt so deep, it had started to harden into silence. I didn't respond right away. I read them under the soft yellow lamp above my workbench, Eleanor's picture watching over my shoulder like always. I could hear her voice in my mind, gentle, steady, forgiving. He's hurting now. Like you did. And so, slowly, I let him back in. We started meeting once a week, just coffee in the shop office. No big talks. No emotional explosions. Just presence. He'd bring his daughters sometimes, Lily and Grace, and they'd run around the shop like it was a jungle gym. They loved the place. Said it smelled like old machines and cookies, whatever that meant. I let them think I was just Mr. John, the nice man who made things with metal. And that was okay. Caroline never came. She didn't write. Didn't visit. I imagined she was still bitter. Still trying to figure out how to look a man in the eye after wishing him gone. I didn't hold it against her. Some people take longer to face themselves than others. Then, one Saturday in early spring, Michael invited me over for dinner. He said the girls had begged for it, wanted to show me a painting they made of Grampy Wren and the Machine Monsters. I laughed. Said I'd come. I arrived at 6 p.m., wearing my best button-down and holding a small lemon pie from the bakery down the street. The house looked the same, too clean, too curated, like a magazine cover. I hesitated at the front step, the memory of walking away years ago pressing heavy on my shoulders. But the door opened before I could turn back. Lily grabbed my hand. You're sitting next to me. Grace held the painting, beaming with pride. That's your beard, see? It's made of screws. Michael smiled from behind them, his eyes softer than I'd seen in years. Come in, Dad. The table was set with silverware that probably hadn't been touched in months. The air smelled of roast chicken and rosemary. Caroline was nowhere in sight. Where's your wife? I asked quietly. Michael looked away. She's upstairs. She wasn't ready. I didn't push. I nodded. Fair enough. Dinner was simple, full of laughter and crumbs and juice spills. The girls asked me what my favorite machine was, and I told them about the old punch press from 1976 that nearly took my thumb. They gasped like I was Indiana Jones. Michael just smiled. After dessert, the girls ran off, and Michael sat across from me at the now quiet table. I think about that night all the time, he said. Your birthday. The cupcake. The words I said. I didn't answer. I was scared, he continued. Not of you. Of being a failure. Of turning into someone who couldn't handle life. And I made you carry that fear for me. I looked down at my hands. They were stained, lined, older than they'd ever felt, but they didn't shake. I don't need you to make it up to me, I said. I just need you to remember who we were before the world got too loud. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I do, Dad. I do now. I stood slowly. Good. Then we're all right. Before I left, Lily hugged me and whispered, "Don't wait too long to come back, okay?" I kissed her forehead. I won't. As I walked to my truck, I looked back at the house, the lights warm, the laughter faint, the window shades drawn. The table had been full again. The food had been good. But something inside me told me not to get too comfortable. Some wounds don't close with dinners. They close with time. With space. With grace. Michael stood at the door, watching me. He didn't ask me to stay. And I was grateful for that. Because I wasn't ready either. But I knew something he didn't. He had taken the first step toward redemption. And I, the old man who once stood forgotten at his own birthday table, had chosen to forgive. Not with words. But with a quiet place at the table. One that would always be open. Do you believe people change when it's too late? I want to hear your thoughts that it's quiet now. Most mornings, I wake up before the sun, brew a small pot of coffee in the dented percolator Eleanor and I bought back in '73, and sit by the window in my little room above the shop. The city's slow breath rises with the dawn, freight trucks growling in the distance, birds pecking at crumbs on the sidewalk, the occasional hum of a car radio drifting up through the alleyway. I used to think peace would come like thunder, a grand announcement, a final chapter where the hero stands tall. But that's not how it works. Peace came to me like dust settling after a long storm. Quiet. Earned. Holy in its stillness. The shop is doing well. Better than Harold or I ever imagined. We've hired 2 more young men from the local trade school, sharp minds, respectful hands. I train them like I trained myself, slow, thorough, with more questions than instructions. Tyler calls me coach now. Says I have dad energy. I don't correct him. Harold's retired officially, though he still shows up on Fridays with donuts and bad jokes. We sit on the back loading dock and talk about the old days. He never asked for the full story of Michael, and I never offered it. Some friends understand more through silence than explanation. As for Michael, he comes by twice a week now. He's still with Caroline, though things between them are, in his words, healing with scar tissue. I told him that sometimes scars make us more honest. You stop pretending you're whole and start living with what's real. He brings Lily and Grace to the shop sometimes. They love watching the machines, love making me tiny gifts out of nuts and washers. One time, Grace made me a crown out of bolts and zip ties. She called me King Fix-It. I wore it all afternoon. I never moved back in. Not because I couldn't. But because some doors, once closed, aren't meant to swing open again the same way. My home is here now, above the hum of machines, surrounded by metal and memory. I kept it simple, a bed, a radio, Eleanor's photo, and a shelf of old journals. Every Sunday, I sit at the workbench and write. I write about the years I lost. The man I used to be. The son I once carried, and the father I became again. Last week, Michael finally brought Caroline. She stood in the doorway, unsure. Her eyes didn't meet mine at first. But then, softly, she said, "Thank you for not holding it against me." I nodded. It wasn't mine to hold. We had lunch. She brought lemon pie. It wasn't Eleanor's recipe, but it was good. And the gesture was enough. Sometimes, healing doesn't need a speech. Sometimes it just needs someone to show up, with pie. Michael and I don't talk much about the past anymore. Not directly. But every time he asks for advice, every time he offers to help clean a machine, every time he hands me a wrench without me asking, I feel it. He remembers. He regrets. But more importantly, he's rebuilding. That's all I ever wanted. Not an apology carved in gold. Just a son who could walk beside me without shame. Last night, I passed by their house. I don't always do that, but something drew me there. The lights were on. I saw Michael outside, raking leaves. He paused when he saw me. He waved. And this time, I waved back. Not with pain. But with peace. I turned and walked home, boots tapping softly against the cracked sidewalk. The shop's neon sign buzzed in the distance, a gentle hum against the night sky. Inside, I climbed the stairs slowly. My knees ached. My back protested. But my heart was light. I sat down by the window, coffee in hand, and watched the stars blink into existence. And I thought of Eleanor. Of her hands in mine. Her laugh. Her voice, the last time she looked at me, "Take care of him, John. He'll need you more than ever." I did, Ellie. Not the way I thought I would. Not in the comfort of our home. But in the fire of disappointment. In the quiet forge of patience. In the long wait for a son to return not just to his father, but to himself. And now? Now I have peace. Not the peace of revenge, or the hollow victory of, "I told you so." But the peace of knowing I never gave up. Not on him. Not on myself. Maybe he lost a father. But I finally found myself.